Hello, and welcome to Risk Assessment for Potential Elemental Impurities on Drug Products and Medical Devices, presented by American Pharmaceutical Review and sponsored by Nelson Labs. My name is Mike Auerbach. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of American Pharmaceutical Review, and I'll be the moderator during today's event. In this webinar, you will learn the concept of risk assessment for potential elemental impurities, how potential elemental impurities on drug products and medical devices are regulated, and get expert insights on how to develop methodologies regarding elemental impurities on drug products and medical devices via ICP-MS. In addition, this event will hold a live question and answer session at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, click on the Ask a Question tab on the right side of your screen. Please take note, the right side of your screen also features an overview of this webinar and more information regarding our speaker. If you have a technical question during the event, click the Test Your Connection button at the bottom of your screen. From there, you can access additional webinar support. Finally, we encourage you to use the social media widgets beneath the webinar to share with your friends and colleagues. And now, allow me to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Sul-Yeon Cho is a department scientist for Nelson Labs at the Chemistry Nelson Labs Fairfield. Dr. Cho has been working as a department scientist since 2017. He has broad expertise in developing and validating the analytical methodologies within pharmaceutical development using HPLC, GC, and ICP coupled with mass spectrometry. Dr. Cho received his PhD degree in pharmaceutical science from the Seoul National University in Seoul, Republic of Korea. He then moved to the U.S. and received postdoc training at the University of Illinois at Chicago and the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. Dr. Cho, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Mike, for introduction. So I copied this from my LinkedIn page, and you could find me here, Sul Cho. I am product of the Seoul National University, Seoul, South Korea, and I moved into United States year 2002 after I got my PhD degree from the pharmaceutical science. And then here, 2017, I joined into Nelson Labs Fairfield, and then using ICP-MS, and then the work on this our topic. Now let's get into overview. So when drug products and medical devices were submitted for approval, the regulatory authorities could ask the question or the request saying, please submit your risk assessment for potential elemental impurities. So question is how we could address this request, risk assessment for potential element impurities on the product and or medical devices. So USP, the accordance with this ICH, and set it up these guidelines. So now the call it as ICH Q3D, now revision number 1, or the USP General Chapter 232, 233, they adopted into here the starting January 2018, this limit of the elemental impurities limit. And these ICH Q3D and the USP 232 chapters include catalyst element and other inorganic contaminants that may enter a drug product from the raw materials or the manufacturing process and the environment, and then packaging, and then container closure systems. This maximum exposure limit are defined according to each impurity's toxicity and route of exposure. So now, what you audience will learn in this webinar, learn the concept of this risk assessment for potential elemental impurities, how potential elemental impurities on drug products and or medical devices are regulated, get the expert insight on method development, validation, verification regarding these elemental impurities on drug products, medical devices via ICP-MS. Areas of the science research is going to be elemental impurities, ICP-MS, risk assessment. So next slide is going to be these guidelines synced with the USP 232, 233 general chapter. So evaluation of the toxicity data for potential elemental impurities, and then establishment of a permitted daily exposure for each element of toxicological concerns, and application of a risk-based approach to control elemental impurities in drug product. So obviously, when we talk about these big things, people could Google it. So I did it for you guys or the audience, saying that this exactly hit the target when we Google this word, ICH-Q3D revision 1 or USP 232, 233. So all this information could be available, and then we could move on to here, and then safety assessment of the potential elemental impurities. How do we do it? Principles of the safety assessment of the elemental impurities for oral, parenteral, inhalation. This is going to be a lot of administration. So we do it this way: the likely oxidation state of the element in the drug product, human exposure, safety data when it provided application information, the most relevant animal study if it is available, the route of administration, whether oral, parenteral, or inhalation. Obviously, this one going to be very important, the relevant endpoint. So how we classify all these elements? Obviously based on toxicity. So here is going to be 3 categories. Class 1, the elements are human toxicants that have limited or no use in the manufacture of the pharmaceuticals, in this case drug product. So cadmium, arsenic, lead, mercury, it is heavily regulated in here. Second is class 2A element has relatively high probability of occurrence. So 3 elements, cobalt, palladium, nickel, are in this category. Next one is same class 2 is going to be 2B, is called element have a reduced probability. So these are the silver, gold, iridium, osmium, palladium, platinum, all the other is the ruthenium, the selenium, thallium. And then class 3 is going to be relatively low toxicity but still regulated. So later on, this the lithium, antimony, barium, molybdenum, copper, tin, chromium. So we will see a little bit higher number than all the others. Since it's the relatively low toxicity, but still these elements are regulated. Next topic is going to be risk assessment and control the elemental impurities. So now we are talking about actual numbers. The identify known and the potential source of the elemental impurities that may find their way into the drug product. Then evaluate the presence of a particular elemental impurity in the drug product by determining the observed or predicted level of the impurity and comparing with the established PDE. Then now we need to summarize and document this risk assessment. Identify if controls built into the process are sufficient, or identify additional controls to be considered to limit elemental impurities if present. And then if it should not be over the limit, so we need to consider the process to minimize this risk. The source of element, where it came from. So I borrowed this one coming from this ICH guideline. So this element end up in the drug product could come from all these other sources. So it is recommended saying the risk of inclusion of elemental impurities can be reduced through process understanding, equipment selection, or equipment qualification, or GMP process. So I point out here something like water. If water is contaminated, let's say lead, or mercury. Obviously, it will end up with drug product. So here, the risk of the inclusion of elemental impurity from water system, obviously we could the limit of that risk by complying the compendial method, the water quality requirement. So if purified water or water for the injection is used in these manufacturing processes. So now this permitted daily exposure limit per each elemental the impurities in drug product. Here, this guideline and USP general chapter saying either orally administered or the parenteral or inhalation, show about the number here, about class 1, class 2, class 2A, class 2B, and then here there's a definition saying any element should be considered if intentionally added, or here there's a little bit the shaded number. These are the numbers, and the shaded element should be considered in product risk assessment if not intentionally added. So this table continue into next slide. This class 2B continued, and class 3 showing up here. So same thing apply here. Any element should be considered if intentionally added, and this shaded element should be considered even if not intentionally added. Now we turn it into USP general chapter, and then now the USP general chapter 232, they introduced the concept of J value, since this the PDE need to be used in actual work. So now this J value need to be calculated. So meaning converting this PDE into actual concentration, meaning nanogram per milliliter level. Previously, the table says microgram per day of each element per ICP-MS, or per se OES, but we are not talking about ICP OES here since we are using ICP-MS for this work. Now, the definition is going to be J, the concentration of the element of the interest at the target limit, appropriately dilute to the working range of the instrument. So now, since we are talking about ICP-MS, we knew that already ICP-MS is very sensitive instrument. Could go down to nanogram per meter level, even go down to picogram per meter level. So obviously, if you use the microgram per meter level, so it will destroy the instrument. Or I should say the saturation by all these elements, so you cannot use next time. So now we need to properly dilute into the working condition. So that's where this J value comes up here. So now saying if the target elements are lead and arsenic for the analyte of an oral solid drug product, and then this drug product has daily dose of 10 grams per day using ICP-MS. So now we know for sure about this ICP-MS could deliver very fine limit of the 0.01 nanogram per milliliter into 0.1 microgram per milliliter. So this dilution kicks in. Let's say in here we are using 1 to 100 dilution. So here we say since the number is going to be 0.5 and then 5, so we are going to calculate here the PD from the lead and arsenic. So we turn it into the number and then 5 and then here, and then we're going to put the number and then 100 and then daily maximum dose of 10. Then turn it into the calculation. The J would thus equal to 5 nanogram and 15 nanogram for lead and arsenic respectively. So when the dilution factor is added. So now you could calculate. So now next slide, you're going to be saying this procedure for elemental limit test. Actually, this is the pointing into USP General Chapter 233. We calculate the J value, and then let's say PDE on the 24 element. We decided by the automation type, let's say oral, or parenteral, or inhalation. So the obviously daily maximum dose is required, and then we are going to apply dilution factor depending on this situation. Here, next slide, we are going to use this one into actual work, risk assessment for the potential elemental impurity on drug product. So now we are going to apply this general chapter into actual work. How is it being used for drug product? So now we need to calculate in actual matter in here in this way, saying based on this, we are going to put the number daily maximum dose 1 gram. The dilution factor is going to be 1000 applied in here. So we are going to calculate into here the number here and turn it into J value from microgram per day into it ended up with after calculation. It's going to be 5 or 15 or all the number available into nanogram per minute. So this, I provide this as actual the application, or there could be other vendor kind enough to show you about how they could calculate. So I look up the internet, I found this could be a little bit interesting or the valuable for your reference. Here this table I copy from the application note, and then they calculate in a similar way about this, about whether you could apply the 250 or 1000 depending on this dilution factor. So in here they could calculate from orally dose, and in this case they calculate from the 10 gram and then apply into dilution factor, and they end up with this number or this number. So now, since we are talking about actual work, and I should say how it could be done. So we could purchase commercially available either individual standard or assorted one. So something like this is actual table which I'm using for the work, and from here we could say the stock solution commercially available, we purchase, and we are going to use from here and each individual standard, or we could make it into the dilution through dilution preparation, and then from this multi-element standard. So actually in procedure saying we need to create the standard solution based on this J value calculation, 0.5J and 1.5J, and then we consider as a standard calibration solution. Now since we prepare standard, and then based on the procedure, we are going to prepare sample solution, and then we are going to use that standard and sample solution into actual the ICP-MS, the instrument, and then working conditions. Now here I need to point out that the internal standard is used. The internal standard is going to be usually Albion. Now before we start anything, we need to dive into a little bit of this ICP-MS. ICP-MS, the name is coming from inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer. So target element, the metal is ionized, mostly positively charged by an inductively coupled plasma. The plasma is energized or ionized by inductively heated gas. We use argon gas for this purpose with an electromagnetic coil, and it contains a sufficient concentration of ions and electrons to make the gas electrically conductive. Most metals, if present, are easily dissolved and formed ions in acidic aqueous solutions. So in this metal, usually we use 2% nitric acid as a diluent or blend for the metal. And it is introduced into ICP-MS, and the target element would be detected based on atomic mass. Oh, this one I should point out later. For the detection of the target element, whether we could use single isotope, something like mercury, atomic mass 201, or we could choose multiple isotopes, something like lead, atomic mass 204, 206, 208, and then we could combine together and then using the detecting lead. since I point out this before, and then this actually mass spectrometer, I think everybody knows about this, not detecting mass, detecting mass over charge, M over G. So, but usually in ICP-MS, the charge is usually +1, so this M over G +1, so actually we could say detect mass. Next is actually the showing about the instrument. Obviously there should be the sample handling step required. We use auto sampler, and then there should be a sample delivery. The peristaltic pump is available, and then delivery into the mass spec here. Basic component of the ICP-MS is shown here, and then sample introduction, and then plasma selection, and then interface, getting into mass analyzer, and then ion optic lenses available here, and then pulse, deselecting the targeted ions coming from this element, and then the detector actually delivers the result. So a little bit deep dive into ICP-MS. This is what they call the spray chamber. The sample solution is being nebulized and then changed into an aerosol, then introduce ionization unit in sample spray chamber. So then it is saying the plasma torch turns into plasma. So this diagram is actually showing how this plasma ionization occurs. So A section of this device that ionizes the element in the sample that are carried by carrier gas. We already mentioned that before about usually we use argon gas. So here, obviously argon is going to deduct this electron, so it is going to be positively charged. This is already the showing about actual selection process of target element, and when it is introduced, carrier gas, argon gas, deliver here the plasma, and then introduction coil and the plasma torch, and then sampling cone, schema cone, and then shield plate. And this is also showing about how our target element could be selected and then introduced into mass analyzer. So this, I'm showing this one because when we heavily use this one is going to be dirty, and then probably blacked out, and then later on probably you cannot detect anything. So meaning this one is going to be very dirty, you need to clean it. Now I need to show about a little bit component part of the ICP-MS. There should be plasma generation part, and then ion lenses, and then the collision and reaction cells, a quadrupole, and detector. So now, when it's going to be the actual use, we need to do this kind of step. We need to turn it on plasma. So actually, we already talked about this plasma torch. Then we need to use some parameters to optimize all these parameters for this experiment. Obviously, since I talk about this daily verification, we need to do this every single time if we want to use it. So now this we call all this step as we call it as a tuning, and then obviously this tuning requires some of the parameters. We use this for tuning, we call it as a tuning solution, and then we use some element for that regard, and then we use lithium, yttrium, and thallium. Now checking this number coming from 7, 89, and then 205. It could be determined here. The specification is going to be when we introduce this tuning solution into the system, it should be below NMT 5% for single element, or oxide NMT 3%, and then doubly charged should be below 2%. So I just show about the actual tuning record on that regard, and then based on this, all these passed. So I should say, all compounds. But actually, where it came from? So actually, we could get this tuning report when we do the work about tuning. From here, we could check about these numbers, and then now, since all this verification and tuning passed the requirement, now we could use it. So now I'm showing about this actually in use, and then obviously this sequence provided by starting this blank injection, and then standard calibration, and then check standard verification, then all this one properly acquired, and then we could move on to sample injection. Now, from here, using the auto sampler, deliver into ICP-MS. So now it turns into standard portion, and then we are injecting standard solution, and then as you can see here, the 0.5J, 1.5J element standard solution injected from here. And then since this one we are talking about, see here 23, I'm going to tell you later about this part. We suppose use 24, and then this one all degrade the linearity, and the specification is going to be, and then over 0.99 all passed. Now we want to check our check standard. So actually the spec is going to be below 20%. So I'm just showing about this specific one, selenium. The number is 381.5. And then nominal number came from this 383.6. It's good. Pass. Now I was talking about why is 23, not 24, because of this. So when we check about this silver, number is 64.1. But in reality, the nominal number was 48 nanogram per milliliter. Did not pass. Why this happened? So it was reported the silver could be interfered by other elements such as molybdenum or ytterbium present due to ion suppression or ion saturation. So if silver could be interfered from other ions co-present, so that's where numbers a little bit, I should say, unstable, a little bit high. So meaning we need to separate this from other ions. So silver ran separately to minimize this interference. In this case, actually number is very good and they're very close to the nominal numbers. Now it passed. Meaning that where here, we try to do 24, we cannot do this silver. That's where we are doing 23 alone. And then we took out the silver and then separately only detecting silver alone. So now this evidence, this RS is very high, decreased a lot. So now it passed. So now sample. So now sample injected, and then this one is showing here, and then it turned away all 0. So we could say this coming from internal standard. So results from work is going to be, this one was initially started, the objective. We calculate the J value, and then based on the procedure, we check the standard from 0.5 and then 1.5J. They turned out to be this from sample was the below 0 or 0. So the result is going to be not detected over this 24 element. Now we were talking about the drug product. Now we are talking about medical devices. So medical device is not mentioned, officially mentioned in USP 232, 233. Still, when medical device get introduced into human body, let's say, for example, implant for knee or joint replacement, so FDA could say, or definitely will, in my opinion, request, oh, did you risk assessment for this same thing, potential elemental impurities, when it is submitted for approval? So now here we are talking about this medical device. So I should say will be treated as drug product, or could be calculated as per unit if microgram per gram. Conversion could not be available due to nature of this device. I should mention another thing here is dietary supplement is regulated in USP 2232. The chapter name here is the elemental contaminant in dietary supplement. So medical device. I should say this. This is one way of doing it for the medical device. So other type of the approach could be available. So we need to calculate J value as well here, but the general chapter 232 already mentioned about this could be not per day. Previously we were talking about microgram per day. It turns into microgram per gram. So in this case, it's going to be per parenteral the PDE, since I also use this example for something like the knee replacement for implant in human body. So we consider that one as parenteral PDE. So using this number and then turn it into microgram per milliliter, and here. Later this one, the unit could be converted into microgram per device. So actually we did that following the previous approach and then apply the sample solution into the system, and then we turned out to be, we checked at the time for that specific example of the sample, and we found out the over 10 element, we found nothing, let's say below 0. So in here, when we prepare the report, we could say the per device microgram not detected. So now I need to talk about a little bit about this method validation and verification. So this one, since its name is method validation and verification, this one should follow USP 1225 and 1226. So method validation verification regarding elemental impurity on drug products and or medical devices by ICP-MS. So here, we talk about here is going to be whether we could check accuracy and precision and the intermediate precision, or this linearity or error curable. So based on all this, we could check this and then generate the result, whether these could meet the specification about these categories. So once we provide all these results and they just met the requirement, so we should say it created the method. What we did was validated and or verified. So that becomes into routine test. So here, this is I just copy from our actual work here. So after method is validated and verified, it becomes routine test. So obviously this is going to be our specification for any sample for elemental impurities using ICP-MS. And then once we check it about using our procedure I mentioned before, and then it could turn into the result saying if whichever the element below this number, and then you should say it passes the specification. So now finally in the summary, so we covered this concept of the risk assessment for potential elemental impurities. So regulation on the potential elemental impurities for drug product and medical device were discovered here, and then we cover these areas, and then method validation verification regarding elemental impurities on drug product and medical devices by ICP-MS. We spend a little bit time on how ICP-MS we could use on this regard. So this is Nelson Fairfield, is part of Sotera Health. Thank you all. Now we will have questions.
Thanks, Dr. Cho, for your very informative presentation. I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit any questions you have for Dr. Cho in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. So now let's take a look at our questions. And Dr. Cho, our first question is, how could we do this work with ICP-OES? We do not have ICP-MS.
Thank you, Mike. The answer could be the USP 232, 233, the general chapter says ICP-OES could be used for this purpose. Since the ICP-MS, the MS is such much better the instrument than ICP-OES, so since we are talking about this dilution ratio, so we could adjust the dilution ratio, probably a little bit smaller number than what we use for ICP-MS. So adjust for this dynamic range, and then for respective the standards. So we could use it for such a manner, the way I present it here.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Do we need method development, validation, verification for this work?
Answer is yes and or no. If, depending on the sample formulation, if it's very simple, and then probably it could be very simple verification regarding sample, the apply, the logic, the manner, the way presented here. But if a sample is complicated, something like if it is powder, and then it's very hard to dissolve, then we need to go through the process about sample prep, and then we need to validate that sample preparation method, whether it could be appropriate into using this kind of work into the specific sample. So I should say including the heating or acid digestion. Nowadays we use microwave acid digestion. So answer could be yes and no. So using good depending on the sample formulation.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Cho. Our next question is, what is the turnaround time for this kind of work?
Since I'm getting involved a lot recently in this kind of work, then in here, National Fairfield, depending on the sample formulation, we generally give or take 4 to 6 weeks for validation. If it is pretty simple verification, could be 2 weeks. And then it becomes a routine test, give or take just 2 weeks for the turnaround time.
Okay, excellent. Just a reminder to our viewers, if you have any questions for Dr. Cho, to type them in the Ask a Question box, and we'll get to as many as we can. Dr. Cho, our next question is, what are PDEs for products meant for dermal applications?
I already mentioned here saying that this PDE is for analyte, not for sample. So the analyte is going to be our, in this case, 24 element. So question is it there? If it's there, how much is there? So the question was product for summer, the normal the application. So I should say we should focus on the analyte. If it's there, then how much is there? And if it's within limit, then it's okay. So that could be the answer.
Terrific. Thank you. Moving on to our next question. For the risk assessment of parenteral products, do we need to consider the WFI quantity as part of the maximum daily dosage?
So if I recall this answer correctly, WFI meaning water for injection.
Right.
So
yes.
I think, is it part of this active ingredient? I think my guess it is not. So probably the water for injection is to dissolve any kind of active ingredient. So we should focus on what is that active ingredient. Is the water for injection is not, I think, not part of this active ingredient. So in this case, should not be considered as to calculate maximum daily dose.
Excellent. Thanks again. Just another quick reminder, if you have any questions for Dr. Cho, to type them in the Ask a Question box. Our next question is, do large volume injectables, for example, 2 liters a day, pose a challenge for you?
Then we need to define, since the volume does not matter, I believe that that's the entire formulation per se. What we are talking about in there, what is active ingredient? So I believe this is the same question that happened before. Active ingredient is not 2 liters. It's something dissolved in 2 liters as a total volume. And then that could be, if that is 2 liters is going to be maximum volume, but obviously we need to calculate about active ingredient in there. From there, we need to say what could be our dilution ratio it could be, and then what could be our potential, dynamic range for our target analyte may present, may not present, hopefully not present in the specific sample formulation. So it shouldn't be matter in this case. But only concern is what is our active ingredient, then what is the maximum daily dose for the specific active ingredient. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
It appears that we've gone through all of our questions. Saying that, I'd like to thank Dr. Cho for sharing his knowledge with us and also offer a special thank you to Nelson Labs for sponsoring today's event. Please keep a lookout for an email containing a link to view this webinar on demand and to share with your colleagues. Thank you for attending the webinar and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.